Hi, Danny Frank here for GNAT-TV. Again, my mantra is how there is an abundance of very, very interesting and prominent people in southern Vermont. So I'm most appreciative that Treat Williams, one of America's best-known actors from movies, television, and Broadway, has come to GNAT. And Treat, usually I ask this question of our guests: why southern Vermont as a residence? I mean, why didn't you choose, say, the Hamptons or Hollywood?
I grew up in Connecticut, and I learned to ski at Bromley. I started skiing in 1955. My parents brought us up to Peru, and we stayed at the Russell Inn in Peru. And we started coming up every year. And in the 1960s, my parents bought a house in Weston, which I used probably more than they cared for me to use. And about 25 years ago, we purchased a home in Manchester. So we've been coming here. I've been coming here since 1956, 55. And I've always been in love with Vermont. I've always wanted to live here. And recently, we made the decision to come back. My dad's in Connecticut. My son is at NYU, and my daughter's in school in Dorset. And we're back. We just got back about 4 months ago.
So 1955 and all of these places, you are heavily entrenched. You're a Vermonter, really. So.
Well, there's an old story about a guy who was born in New York, and soon after his birth, his family moved here. And he died at the age, in Manchester, I'm told, about 98 years old. And in his obit in the newspaper, it said, "New Yorker dies in Vermont." So I wouldn't ever call myself a Vermonter, but I sure do love it, and we're really happy to be back. We've spent, our happiest times here, and we've decided to settle here.
Now, you mentioned that you were born and raised in Connecticut, and I believe you have a distant relative who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, right?
I think there are two of us that have a distant relative, because Robert Treat, the local vet here, also that name has come down to his family also. But yes, I mean, on my side, my mother's side of the family, the Robert Treat family came down from Robert Treat Payne, and then it became obviously it was someone's surname at one point, and then became the Treat Andrew was my grandfather, and Treat Andrew Jr. was my uncle. He was killed. He was a tail gunner in World War II. So 4 years later, after he died, I was named after him. So they say I'm related. I hope I am. I don't know. I've never done the family tree. If I find out I'm not, that's okay. But I'm told in some distant way I'm a relative.
Treat Williams, you have to be one of the hardest working and most working actors in your field. And when you look at the enormous list of credits that you have, going back to a first crime police movie that an old friend of mine produced and starred in, Don Murray. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Deadly Hero was your first film, right, in the 70s?
Yeah, at the time I think I was playing the lead in Grease on Broadway. And they let me out to do these, I think it was probably 3 or 4 weeks. I would work maybe 1 or 2 days a week as Don's partner, but it was the first time I was ever on camera, and it was a great experience. It was also another actor's first film. His name was James Earl Jones.
Oh, really?
He had never been in a movie before, so we share that film as a first film.
Oh. Well, you're both very, very accomplished actors. You and
he's got a lower voice.
James Earl Jones. So, and then you had a very significant part in the film version of Hair, which got you a Golden Globe nomination, or very early in your career.
Yes. Yeah.
So, any reminiscing on Hair?
No, I mean, it was probably the longest audition process I've ever experienced. Milos Forman came to see the show with Baryshnikov one night, and I went in to see him next day, and he was very complimentary, and I went. That began a process of 12 auditions over a 4-month period, and ultimately the part came to me, and it was very, very helpful for me to. I think it actually led to Prince of the City as a role, and sort of began my film career. So it was a very exciting time, and I was very lucky to play it.
I want to touch on Prince of the City in a moment, but you're a graduate of Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. So is this where you decided to become an actor, and how did you make that career decision?
Well, I liked it in high school, and I played football, and I was very committed to my football the first year at school. And I did a play in the winter or spring, I can't remember, and I made the decision at that point, my freshman year, that I was going to be an actor. And if anybody's ever played football in college, it's almost an occupation. So one of the most difficult things I ever did was go to the coach in the spring and tell him that I was not going to play the following year. We'd had a good freshman team, and a bunch of us were going to be kind of the new breed that next year on the varsity. And it was very difficult to do, but I knew that I was never going to be a pro football player, and I wanted to start focusing. So freshman year in college is when I began to study seriously to become a professional actor.
And one of your early credits has, in fact, become a movie classic, Sidney Lumet production, Prince of the City, mm-hmm. and it brought you another Golden Globe nomination. Mm-hmm. And as you look back shooting a movie like that, did you ever think that this film, along with your part in it, would earn such a special place, would stand out so much as you were shooting a film like that?
You know, you don't think like that. It was such an enormous challenge for me at that age. I wasn't a particularly experienced film actor. So I was just getting through it. I don't think I was thinking about results. I was thinking about, I got a lot to do this day, and it's a big day. It was a very deeply emotional part. So I never really thought about it. And when the film was successful, I always attributed the success to Sidney and to J. Preston Allen, not to myself. I think he pretty much walked me through that performance, and I was very lucky to have him as a director. But I never really thought it was much about me. I thought it was a great cast and an extraordinary script, and a real kind of American tragedy, which is interestingly cyclically repeated itself over the years. That you have these periods of when cops go bad, and that's been a consistent theme for years since then.
Well, like we mentioned Deadly Hero a couple of minutes ago, and you shared with us that both you and James Earl Jones, this was your first film, and as you think back to that period, I mean, what thoughts may have crossed your mind about your futures and your careers? Recall any of that?
Well, your
ambitions.
Interestingly, a lot of actors had great ambitions to be a film actor. The river of life takes you in odd directions, and I never thought of myself as I didn't dream of being in the movies. I never even considered it. When I was in college, I was studying the records of the great English actors, from Gielgud and Olivier and Alec Guinness, and listening to their performances of Shakespeare. And I went to London my senior year to see all the theater I could see. In my mind, I thought I'd be lucky if I was working at Yale Rep, or at Cincinnati Rep, or at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. There was nothing in my consciousness about being in movies or television. I realized as I got older, and that basically they're all plays. They're just in a different medium. And now I'm open to, people say, which medium do you like best, TV or film or theater? And I always say, well, theater is the most exciting, of course, because you have an audience. But really, I think the decision is always, what's the most interesting story to tell? And that's usually the question I ask myself, is what doesn't get in the way of my family, and what would be a great story? And that's pretty much how I decide now.
Mm-hmm. One of the other pieces early on in your career, a television version of Streetcar Named Desire, where, of course, you played Stanley Kowalski. And when you prepare for a role like that, which has been done many times, do you look at your fellow actors and the way in which they interpreted Kowalski, say on stage or in film? How do you prepare for a part like that?
Well, I had not seen Brando's performance in the film and decided to see it after I did it. And I was the first guy to put it on film since Brando. And people said that was the greatest performance he ever gave. Are you crazy? And I said, look, if I fail or if I don't, this is a part of my journey, and I'm going to do the best I can in this part. And the English have an attitude where they'll go see actors and stuff, and they say, Peter O'Toole wasn't as good. in that Macbeth, but I can't wait to go see him do Hamlet. You know, there's a kind of a, actors can fail or succeed, and whatever anybody thought of it, I thought it was part of my journey as an actor to be offered that great role. I was going to do it. But I do remember when we were shooting it that the people doing wardrobe and props and stuff kept saying, well, he wore this or he wore that. And I said, look, we're not trying to imitate the movie. We're making a production of this play. And we had Beverly D'Angelo and Anne Margaret and Randy Quaid, and I said, let's do our interpretation of the play. It's Tennessee Williams' work, and there are going to be wonderful interpretations of this play down the road for the next 100 years. Alec Baldwin was superb in it on Broadway. I think we all, you know, you're offered a great part, you do it, and you take your chances. I haven't read criticism in 25 years, so it doesn't really affect me much. I figure if I'm working, something's going right, and I leave it at that.
Sure, sure. There was a movie that I believe you did about J. Edgar Hoover.
Yes,
the
it was
life
called
of
Hoover.
It was called Hoover, yeah. And of course, he was for our younger people the famous, legendary head of the FBI
Turned the
for
FBI
many
into
years.
the G-men, yeah.
And again, a historical figure. What do you put into the study of the character to develop that character?
If a historical figure is, and at the time, kids don't remember now, but at the time he was real present physically in people's minds. They were young enough to have seen him in the administrations up to making the film. He'd only died somewhat recently. So when you are playing a historical figure who, and you can make different choices. Frank Langella's choice as Nixon was not to imitate Nixon, but to give a sense of him. I did the same thing. I think I had the same approach, which was to try and sort of get the essence of a person, an essence of a human being. He was a very private guy. There's always been, you know, there were rumors about his sexuality. There were rumors about his relationship with his number 2 guy. But I think that you try and find that part of that person that really is the sort of the crux of who they are. And whether you imitate a voice or a physical demeanor depends on whether or not, if that person is someone who everybody knows, then people are going to be looking to. For instance, recently the piece that HBO did on Sarah Palin, you know. You got to do Sarah Palin because she's on television still.
Sure.
So I think you have to make the choice according to the script and what you're trying to do. And that's what we did. Yeah.
So as an example, going into a part like that, how many hours or days of due diligence goes into developing that?
Well, we took him from 26 to 82. So I had an enormous amount of work to do. And in those days, nowadays, the work with prosthetics is so much better than it used to be. The rubbers that they use and the materials they use were much less malleable, so that you had to be very, very careful on the edges on the makeup. And as I aged and got the jowls and the face got heavier, it was, you know, I would come into makeup at about 3:30 in the morning, and I wouldn't get out of the chair till 8, and then we'd start shooting. So it was a lot of work, and a lot of the work went into just being in the makeup chair and trying to make that as realistic and as appropriate for the age as possible. And there was a lot that went into that. But also, you always have to remember that you basically you don't play the person, you play the person that's in the text. You go from the script. I always play, if it says it's Bill Clinton or whoever it is, I'm playing the Bill Clinton that they've written out of the text, because it may be a fantasy of a famous person. It may be an enlargement of that person's personality. So your Bible is always the script. And that's the person I play. I don't worry about whether it's, okay, he's got a famous name, he has a way of talking and walking, but the script is the Bible. And that's, if you work off of that, I don't think you can go wrong.
Treat Williams, I think one of the marks of an excellent, skilled actor like yourself lies in being able to convince a viewer, an audience member, of who you are, your character, and the depth of the character. And even though I've seen you around southern Vermont, and I've seen you in so many vehicles that you've done, I remember watching you in a 2002 television movie with Marcia Gay Harden.
Oh, yeah.
Called Guilty Hearts.
Right.
And how I hated you. You were a sleaze. You were a lowlife. And talk a little bit about the dynamic of being able as an actor to communicate the portrayal of that character. You sort of have the power of putting your audience under that spell, so to speak, even though you're really Treat Williams.
Well, I had a lot of help on that. I mean, the script was not the greatest script I'd ever read. So I called my friend David Mamet and said, could you take a look at this and give me an idea, because I'm lost on this. I don't know what to do. And Dave said, well, let me take a look at it. And the script came back to me with these wonderful little changes that David had written in for me. Just suggestions. No change in the writing, but just suggestions on how to play it. And I'll always be grateful to him for that. But I think you know, I mean, there's a deliciousness about pretending to do the things that you're, you know, I mean, what sets you apart in society is that you can feel whatever you want to feel, but it's what you act upon that makes you who you are. And I get a chance to play these people who actually choose not to worry about all those things that stop us from doing bad things, you know. And that's actually kind of fun. You get a chance to kind of unleash those demons and pretend that you are going to kill somebody you're angry with. And I think those characters are actually a lot of fun, particularly if there's delicious villains. Villains are a lot more fun to play than the male lead. So I find myself, you know, leaning toward that a great deal. I've done it recently quite a bit. Just finished one 2 weeks ago. So they're more fun. They're more fun. They're people who are manipulative, and they're not burdened by any sense of how things should be. So they're fun to play.
It seems that many of your roles that you gravitate to are involved with police work,
yeah,
or doctors. You seem to play a lot of doctors or medical people, right?
Well, not a lot. I mean, it seems like a lot because I played Andy Brown in Everwood for 4 years. But as I look back on it, I think I've only played 1 or 2 doctors. But since I played him for 4 years, there's a, you know, people think of me as being bearded in the white coat. But the cop thing is wonderful. Right now I'm on White Collar on USA, and we're on Tuesday nights at 9. And that has really been wonderful because it's so fun to play. I was this young kid in Prince of the City. I was 30 years old. And now it's 30 years later, and I'm playing this kind of hardened cop who no longer has his head in the clouds and sees life from a completely different perspective. And it's great to play the tough, kind of wizened, experienced cop. It's a kind of full circle. That's been a lot of fun.
So again, taking just what you say into account, what have you come to understand, say, about the cop, the police officer or the detective? What, you know,
I don't know.
What characteristics?
I don't think I can generalize. They're people. Some people are, you know, some people have high ideals, and some people don't, and some cops do, and some don't. I mean, they're people, and that's the hardest thing is that there's a very high bar set for cops, and it's. I think one of the things about being a cop, particularly a lot of guys, particularly narcotics, is we don't have, those of us who work in other fields don't have those temptations, and I think that's one of the problems. Mm-hmm. You take a normal guy and you put $100,000
in front of him
in his suitcase,
sure.
And he can't pay his kids' dental bills, or he's missing the rent next month, and he might lose his house. And you got a bunch of these scumbags in the room that are going to get right back into the country again. They're going to be sent back to Colombia or wherever, and they're going to get right back in the country again. And the cop says to himself, why not me? Why shouldn't I get a little piece of this? I'll take a little piece of it and give most of it back, you know. It's a very difficult thing. So I think one of the differences is, particularly in narcotics, is this temptation. You're living in a particular world. It's very hard not to become a part of it. The guys in Vice, same thing. You got all these girls saying, you know, let me do you a favor, get me out of this, you know. And so I think that's one of the most difficult things. What kind of people are able to say, no, I'm gonna, you know, I'm not gonna take a cup of coffee. You know, it starts with a cup of coffee and a donut for free, you know, and you work your way up from there. And it's, I think it's a difficult occupation. I have great respect for 2 occupations in this country: police officers and teachers. You know, they work very, very hard for what they make, and you know, the military also. But in those 2 environments, particularly in police officers, I think it's difficult to stay the straight and narrow when you're kind of thrown into these environments. So.
You've logged your share of parts in the theater, as we mentioned, and one play which I went to see back in 2000, I guess it was Sondheim's version of Follies.
Yeah.
Now, there was an original version, I think, back in
saw
the
it.
70s, right?
One of the reasons I went to my football coach and said I'm quitting football is because I saw Follies on Broadway.
Dorothy Collins, I think, was in there.
Yeah,
So
it was
at
Gene
the time.
Nelson,
Right.
Dorothy
right,
Collins.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it was an extraordinary production. And in those days, the Broadway shows had a lot more money, a lot more funds, and it was a full orchestra. It was an extraordinary production. Hal Prince directed, and boy, to have gotten to see that was a great honor. That was really one of the most amazing experiences of my life. That album still just soared.
And that motivated you. That was a big motivator.
It was one of the things. It was one of the
Yeah.
things. A couple of movies, a couple of plays I saw, but
Yeah.
that was a big motivator, yeah.
So now, years later, to star in a production with some top people, Blythe Danner, Judith Ivey,
Gregory Harrison.
Betty Garrett, who was a gem, right, from motion pictures,
I always
right?
gave Betty Garrett a little candy just after we went on stage.
Oh.
And she would tell stories about working with Sinatra, and yeah, it was fun.
So you had some, and it was about the glamour facade of show business, I guess, and what was actually behind the scenes,
Correct.
right?
Exactly. That was it.
And you won a drama desk award for that, I believe,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So.
Yeah, that and there was another musical I loved doing, which was called Captain's Courageous, which was a musical version of the Spencer Tracy film.
And of course, Follies is still on Broadway now, right? In the new version, or
yeah,
I don't know if they
I don't know if that closed or not,
Yeah.
but they went to L.A. and friends of mine saw it and said it was a terrific production. I mean, that play could be produced every few years. It's a wonderful play.
Sure.
I recommend everybody go do it or see it.
Treat Williams, you've done your share of directing too. Do you like acting or directing? What's your first choice?
The directing thing was fun. I did it, and we made a little movie that Dave Mamet wrote for me, and it was about airplanes. And but the work afterwards, the nice thing about being an actor is the day you finish and wrap the film, you go home to the tractor, come up here, have dinner at the Dorset Inn, or the Old Tavern or someplace, and it's months of work to get the film put together afterwards, and I just don't think I have that kind of patience. And I think I realized that, okay, I did it, I liked it, it was fun. If I ended up on a series as a regular, I'd probably start directing 1 or 2 a year. I would enjoy that because I love working with other actors now. I taught a class out in Utah and really enjoyed that. So, maybe under those circumstances, but there are so many, usually if I get a script and I have control over choosing a director, there's a lot of guys that are a lot better than me. I don't want to be directed by me, I want somebody who's really good at it. So I'd pick somebody else.
So for all of the credits you have, the many numerous credits in your career to date, is there something that you personally have found that was most gratifying through the years?
It'll be a list. I mean, I could, if I had time and we got a few minutes, I'd say starting out the beginning would be doing Grease on Broadway for 3 years was extraordinary. And Hair, Prince of the City. There's a film called Smooth Talk that nobody's seen that won Sundance that Laura Dern and I did. I'm very proud of what we're doing on White Collar right now. I think that's terrific stuff. Very proud of Everwood. That was a terrific picture.
For a number of years that ran, right? 5 or 6 years?
4 years.
4 years?
Mm-hmm. That's what took us out to Park City, Utah.
So,
good skiing, though.
Yeah.
I skied a lot of good
In
powder.
Utah, yeah. And you have 2 movies in the can, right?
More than 2.
More than 2, okay.
4.
4 movies.
But one is called Barefoot. That's Evan Rachel Wood and Scott Speedman. And another film I just finished with a gal who was in Lord of the Rings. Her name is Miranda Otto, and that's called The Art of Losing, based on Elizabeth Bishop, the poet. And then I just did a mini-series, the name of which keeps changing. I played the villain, and I did something for Roger Corman last fall. So, just work an actor, that's all.
In our remaining minute or 2, I want to discuss 2 other aspects about Treat Williams' life that many people don't know about. you are an airplane pilot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you worked as a professional pilot for a
did,
while,
yeah.
right?
I'm a flight instructor, commercial pilot, and I've owned about 6 or 7 different airplanes. And actually just joined a club with a bunch of guys here. But yeah, I mean, flying's been a real avocation of mine. I love it as much as acting, and it's kind of my church. So I did a children's book 2 years ago with a friend of mine called Air
That was
Show.
my other
Yeah,
aspect
Disney
there.
Disney put it out, and it's
Yeah.
actually we did a signing over here at the bookstore.
Yeah, children's book about aviation
Just
and
really,
airplanes,
it's an
right?
airplane picture
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Just what the book I never had as a kid. So we did that, and that was a lot of fun. Part of the journey, But yeah, flying's always been a big part of my life, and always will be.
Did you make airplane models as a kid?
No.
The plastic,
No,
the plastic models.
I had no
I
interest.
did.
I didn't.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
interesting. I jumped right in and started flying them at 17, and never made the models. I wanted to fly them. So and my football coach taught me to fly in high school. So.
Treat Williams, thank you very much for being a resident of Southern Vermont and having the I guess, commitment and faith in our area here. And thank you very, very much for coming to GNAT-TV.
Thanks, Danny. I'm lucky to be here. We love it here. Thank you.
Thank you.